What's going on, YouTube, and welcome back to Goal Line Hockey. It's your boy Kevin Forte, and we are taking a look today at the Ottawa Senators going into this season. What do they look like? And we're going to be going over that in the season preview series video today. So, looking at some of their additions and some of their subtractions, we're going to take a look at some of the guys that left Ottawa this offseason. Evgeny Dadonov was traded to the Vegas Golden Knights, so a guy that they lost. And then we lost a couple of depth defensemen. Mark Borowiecki is now no longer a member of the Ottawa Senators. He ends up going to Nashville with John Hines and David Poile. Christian Wolanin is now on the West Coast in LA. Christian Jaros is now a member of the New Jersey Devils. And Joey Daccord is now a member of the Seattle Kraken. He was the guy plucked in the expansion draft from Ottawa. Looking at some of the guys that they added this year, some of these guys aren't necessarily adds. Three of them in particular, but they did have a couple of moves. So Shane Pinto comes in. He's a guy that saw a little bit of ice time last year in Ottawa, another full season under his belt. He has the potential to be a top six forward in the NHL, and I think that's what the Senators are hoping for from Pinto. Michael Del Zotto and Nick Holden come in via free agency and trade. Nick Holden was traded here as a part of the Evgeny Dadonov deal. And Michael Del Zotto comes in through free agency. And then looking at some of their depth guys alongside Shane Pinto that could jump in. Jacob Bernard-Docker, we saw him a little bit last year. Both NDU guys up at North Dakota. So interesting to see them up in Ottawa, so we'll see how that goes. And Lassie Thompson, another good defenseman, could potentially push out a guy like Erik Brannstrom on the blue line this year, and we'll get into that. We've already talked about that, but we'll probably get into that a little bit today. So those are some of the additions. Now looking at their top point producers, you got Brady Tkachuk, who had 36 points last season, still not signed. Connor Brown, Josh Norris, Drake Batherson, Thomas Chabot, Tim Stuchla, and then guys like Evgeny Dadonov no longer there. And this is just a very interesting group. Dzingel no longer there. He kind of struggled, so it wasn't that big of a loss. But this is going to be an interesting group in Ottawa. They're one of those teams that I think if they're younger guys like Batherson, like, some of the blue line guys like Zub, Brannstrom, Thompson, as those guys develop, we're going to see them start to pick things up and make a bigger impact on the team. Josh Norris. So it's one of those things where we could see an interesting group here. Now, looking at their forward group, it's going to look very different from last year. You have Brady Tkachuk, Josh Norris, and Drake Batherson. All right. That's pretty much the same as last year. But then things get interesting. You have Stuchla, Pinto, and Connor Brown as your second line. So Shane Pinto, potentially a top six forward right off the bat for the Ottawa Senators. Bottom six, you got Nick Paul, Logan Brown, and Colin White. And then Alex Formenton, Chris Tierney, and Austin Watson round out the bottom six. So that looks fairly similar to last season. But then we get to the defense, and that's where things change up just a little bit. Tomas Chabot and Nikita Zaitsev as your top pair. Michael Del Zotto and Artem Zub is your second pair. And then the third pair, it's going to be a mix of different guys, but right now they have Nick Holden and Erik Brannstrom. Now, there's a ton of guys. I didn't mention in the Ottawa Senators rumors video some of the guys that could jump into there as depth on defense. You have guys like Dylan Hetherington, a former first-round pick, Lassie Thompson, Maxence Genet, Jonathan Aspirall. Those guys could jump into the lineup, and not to mention, I forgot to mention him in my last video on the Senators, Jake Sanderson. We forget about Jake Sanderson, but Jake Sanderson is a part of this blue line as well. So you could see guys in that bottom pair like Jacob Bernard-Docker, Lassie Thompson, Erik Brannstrom, Jake Sanderson. The list goes on. All those guys could jump into the lineup for their defense. So it's going to be a very different group, I definitely assume, by the end of next season. But even in the beginning of this season in training camp, you're going to see a lot of different faces in Ottawa. And then in between the pipes, you got Matt Murray and Anton Forsberg. That's the starting tandem right now. I could see that changing maybe a little bit, but Forsberg can fill that void coming over from Chicago, right, via waivers. So that is the situation there. And then you look at some of their forward depth that could jump in. You have guys like Parker Kelly, Scott Sabrin, who they just re-signed, Igor Sokolov. You got Victor Lorin, Ridley Gregg, Roby Yarvente. These are guys that could potentially get their opportunity at some point throughout the season, whether through injuries and stuff like that, even trades at the deadline. The Ottawa Senators could maybe look to some of those guys as the season goes along. The Ottawa Senators are right toward the top of the league in terms of the least amount of money spent. $28.5 million in cap space this summer. They've only spent $52 million this summer. So very interesting in that regard. And now comes the big question. I mean, do the Ottawa Senators get into the playoffs here this season? Now, this is a shorter video because I hate to say it, I don't have much positive to say yet. They kind of remind me of the New Jersey Devils in the Metro. They're the Devils of the Atlantic Division. They're a team that's coming out of a rebuild. They've got some good core pieces coming, but they're not there yet. They still have to develop, and they've got to build up some more of that depth. Now, honestly, I think the Devils are further along than the Ottawa Senators in terms of defense because they have a lot of defensemen, but how many of them are actually going to step up and become top four defensemen? You don't really see, you see the Dougie Hamilton, right, and Tomas Chabot. But other than that, who's your Damon Severson defenseman? Like, they don't really have that yet. But we're going to start to see that come together this year. I think they're going to be definitely a team I would bet on. A lot of the money lines, they did very well last season with the under on a lot of their money lines. I don't really get into the betting side too much, but I know that was a team to bet on last year. So the Ottawa Senators, if you need a team to bet on next year, maybe look at the Ottawa Senators. But with that said, they are going to miss the playoffs in my predictions pretty easily. There's too many teams still that are really good in that division that I don't think could get in. Boston, Toronto, Montreal, one of those, potentially two of those three teams could miss the playoffs next season. And I think it's just one of those things where it's the East is just very stacked right now. And I think Ottawa will fall victim to that. And they're still a little bit of a ways away. Not to mention all that money they still have. I just don't think they're quite there yet. They've looked at potentially acquiring a guy like Jack Eichel. But I'm sure once Tim Stuchla or Thomas Chabot was brought up, Pierre Dorion probably just hung up the phone from there. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. What do you think of the Ottawa Senators going into this season? And I know a lot of you will probably presume that they missed the playoffs this year. I think that's the assumption. And maybe some of you will say you're sleeping on the Sens. But let's be honest. You look at that division. There's just too many good teams there. They're going to be competitive for sure. I think they're going to make an argument for themselves. And they'll probably get to the trade deadline and decide, you know what, this isn't going to work. But I think they're going to be competitive through probably the first 50 to 60 games of the year. So let me know your guys' thoughts down below. Guys, thank you so much for watching this video as always, and I will see you guys next time.